to my messy office. Hey, we are in the unit here in June and July entitled Real Relationships. This week we're in session 3. The title of the lesson is Respect Authority. It's out of 1 Samuel chapter 24, verses 3 through 12. And the point of the lesson is to respect the authorities God has placed in your life. You know, we live in a day where respect for authority is very low. And I have to say it's not without some justification. You know, in the past 50 years in our country, we've seen numerous presidential and other government leader scandals. We've seen religious leaders fall to a variety of temptations. We've seen police cameras catch police officers abusing their power, and then that's being broadcast on the news and social media. All these things have contributed to, at the very least, a suspicion of authority, and at most, kind of, I think where we are now is a disrespect for authority. So we're continuing from last week in our lesson here in 1 Samuel, and we're looking at David. Last week we looked at David's relationship with Jonathan, his friend, and this week we're looking at David and his relationship with King Saul. Now, just to get the context of what's going on here, we go back all the way back to chapter 17. We see that's David and Goliath. And Saul, King Saul, gives his blessing to David. You know, go out and fight this guy. So then we get down to verse 18, chapter 18, where Saul's son Jonathan befriends him. And this is where the women start saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. This really starts to irritate Saul. We get down to chapter 20. This is where we were last week, where Jonathan, a friend of David, he warns David that Saul is out to get him, out to kill him. We get to verse 21. David, upon hearing this, flees to the town of Gath, and the people there are saying, Saul struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. This is really starting to irritate Saul. Get down to chapter 22. Saul goes to the town of Nob in Ob, and he kills the priests that are there, all for befriending David. He's really angry at David. He's so jealous. In fact, in 1 Samuel 18:9, it says that Saul was jealous and did not trust David from that day on. So it gives us a little clue. Saul's jealous. He's out to get him. Have you ever had a boss who didn't like you? Maybe he was jealous of your work. Maybe he tried to sabotage you, or she tried to set you up to fail. You know, it's easy for us to respect a good boss. It's easy for us to respect somebody in authority who is good. But it's not nearly as easy to respect authority when they are unjust. That's true for a pastor. That's true for a president. That's true for any authority that we're under. So let's look and see how David handled this. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Saul is on an expedition. He's on his way to hunt down David. And just like we do when we travel, you have to make a pit stop. Even the king has to stop and go to the bathroom. And so he goes into this cave to relieve himself. And, you know, and part of that, of course, is taking off that outer robe. And so it's over here to the side. David and his men are hiding in the back of this same cave that Saul has stopped to use the restroom in. David sneaks up while Saul is relieving himself and cuts off a corner of Saul's kingly robe. Well, then David's conscience gets to bothering him. He says, "Okay, I'm never going to harm Saul." He vows that he will never lay a hand on Saul. And you know, this is not natural. It's natural for us. It's normal for us to kill before being killed. And so David said, "I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to harm Saul." And he persuaded his men to do the same thing, not to harm Saul. And why was that? Because Saul was the king. He was the authority. Even though he was wrong, even though he was after him to kill him, he said, "I'm not going to harm him." We go all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 1, where Samuel the prophet anointed Saul as the first king and called him the Lord's anointed. David picks up on this terminology and he uses it, and he says, basically, who am I to kill someone whom the Lord has anointed as king? Even if he seeks to kill me, I'm not going to kill Saul. Which leads me to an excellent book. You may not have time to read it this week or even buy it this week, but you might look at it. You can get it on your Kindle. It's called A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards. Very good book. It deals with the Lord's anointed, and basically it deals with serving under a pastor who's abusive in power, and it relates back to this story. So David respected Saul's position as a king and the authority that the king had. Now, so Saul's done with his pit stop. He's leaving the cave, and he didn't get too far out of the cave when David calls out to him, and he shows him the piece of robe that he cut off. And he basically tells Saul, look, I could have killed you, but I didn't. I don't have anything against you. I've never done anything wrong. And then he concludes down in verse 12, my hand will never be against you. Now, if in your LifeWay lesson book, one of the titles here, I think in the second section of verses, is that David communicated with grace. And that's exactly what he did. And I can think of a few supporting verses to go along with this if you want to use these. Proverbs 15:1 says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. What does that mean? Well, it's natural when one person says something to get into this shouting match of trying to outdo each other. And we see this on talk shows. We see this on these reality type shows. It's just the natural thing to do. And what it does is when you answer a harsh word with a harsh word, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire, and it just erupts. But replying calmly often will cool the tensions in that heated moment. Now, I've got to say it doesn't always do that, but oftentimes it will. Also, Colossians 4, chapter 6 says, let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. You see, once you speak that word of anger, once you speak those threatening words, it's like the toothpaste is out of the tube. You can apologize all you want to, but it's out there. The damage has already been done, hasn't it? Also, our LifeWay book says that very last verse that we looked at titles it that David left the outcome to the Lord, which is exactly what he did. We can look in Deuteronomy 32, 35, and what does God say? He says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And over in Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 19, Paul echoes this thought when he says, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for the good things in the sight of all men. If possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Also, Matthew chapter 10, the last part of verse 16, Jesus says, be wise or shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. Meaning, be innocent but smart. You see, David, he was harmless. He didn't seek to kill Saul, but he was still smart. He was still smart as a serpent. He continued to hide and elude Saul. So practically, how can we apply some things out of this lesson? Well, first of all, we need to pray for those who are in authority over us, whether they're good bosses or bad bosses or good policemen or bad government officials, whatever the combination is. We still need to pray for those folks in authority. 1 Timothy chapter 2, the first verse tells us to do that, to pray for everyone, for all men. And then in verse 2 specifically says to pray for those kings and others in authority. So that's a biblical command. It's not just something nice to do. It's a command that we are supposed to do. And let's remember that those people in authority have additional stress that we really don't know about. I'll just give you an example. Whenever let's say you're pulled over by an officer. Remember, their life is on the line. They have no idea if you've got a gun, if you've got a knife, if you're wanted. They don't know any of these things. And so just remember that. Pull over, don't start screaming and demanding to know why. Turn off your car. If it's dark outside, turn your inside dome lights on. Keep your hands on the wheel. Just try to make their job as easy as possible. Be genuinely polite, right? Not overly gooey, but just genuinely polite, respectful. They can have a bad day. They don't know what they're walking into. It just makes everybody's life easier. Even at Walmart, Walmart cashiers have a bad day. They're standing on their feet for hours on end. They're dealing with customers, and just be nice. I've noticed if I'm just nice and respectful and initiate a conversation, even with a cashier who doesn't seem to care that much that I'm there and shopping at their store, if I just initiate a conversation, hey, how are you doing today? Has it been a rough day? Or just something like that, and just be nice and respectful, things seem to go a lot better. So what are a couple of takeaways we can learn from the lesson as well? First of all, remember, every open door was not necessarily opened by God. How does that apply to this lesson? Well, David's in the cave. He's eluding Saul. Here comes Saul by himself in a very vulnerable position, and David had the opportunity to kill him. There's an open door, but it wasn't necessarily placed there by God. So just because an opportunity presents itself doesn't necessarily mean that that's God's will for you to do that, right? All right. Also, let's remember, try not to get bogged down in the political mudslinging. It has become, especially with social media, it has become so awful. Both sides. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. People are accusing this side's of the devil, this side's the Antichrist, and blah, blah, blah. It just goes back and forth, and just stay out of that. Have some respect for the office. You don't have to vote for the person. You can be against policies, but mudslinging people is not the way to go. Anyway, that's Jim's soapbox. All right, hope you have a great week. Don't forget to pray for your class, and I appreciate you guys watching.